Chapter 7 Iron and Ashes. The morning sun slanted through Lilly's bedroom windows the next morning, transforming dust motes into drifting gold. The light caught on crystal decanters, casting prismatic rainbows across the Persian carpet where Madame Beaumont knelt, her mouth bristling with pins like some exotic porcupine. "Stand straighter, s'il vous plaît." Madame Beaumont mumbled around her metallic mouthful of seamstress needles, tugging at the half-finished bodice with fingers worn smooth from decades of fabric work. A lady of refinement never slouches. Lilly suppressed a sigh, her gaze drifting to the Thames visible beyond her balcony. The river churned grey-brown beneath the morning light, carrying barges and secrets with equal indifference. Her reflection in the cheval mirror showed a woman transformed, corseted, pinned, and packaged into society's narrow definition of beauty. The emerald silk complemented her complexion, but the bodice pressed against her tattoos, making them itch beneath the fabric. "The waist must be tighter, no?" Madame Beaumont reached for another pin, her French accent thickening with concentration. "For a woman of your profession, elegance is a weapon, oui?" Lilly's eyes narrowed at the seamstress's reflection. The woman knew nothing of her true profession, only the carefully constructed facade of a wealthy widow with mysterious connections. The athame hidden beneath her mattress was a far more effective weapon than any corset. "Tighter would restrict movement," Lilly countered, shifting her weight as Madame Beaumont yanked at the laces. "And in my profession, madame, movement trumps elegance when—" The window exploded inward with a thunderous crash, showering the room with glittering shards. The concussion knocked paintings askew and sent perfume bottles toppling from Lilly's vanity. Madame Beaumont shrieked, pins spraying from her mouth as she tumbled backward onto the carpet. Lilly's tattoos flared beneath the silk, responding to the surge of adrenaline. She pivoted toward the shattered window, her mind calculating escape routes even as her hands reached for weapons that weren't there. The half-finished gown restricted her movement, the tight bodice binding her ribs like iron bands. Of course, she thought with grim resignation. Revenko wouldn't wait long. Splinters of wood and glass glittered in her hair like deadly ornaments. The cool morning air rushed through the jagged hole where her window had been, carrying with it the stench of the Thames and something else, something acrid and alchemical that made her nostrils flare. "Mon Dieu!" Madame Beaumont scrambled backward, her eyes wide with terror. "What is happening?" Lilly ignored her, focusing instead on the object that had crashed through her window. A metal sphere no larger than an apple, now rolling across her bedroom floor with mechanical precision. Its brass surface gleamed dully, etched with familiar sigils that pulsed with sickly green light. The sphere came to rest against the leg of her dressing table, and a seam appeared along its equator, widening with the soft hiss of escaping gas. The sphere split along its seam, releasing a cloud of emerald vapor that coiled like a serpent across the floor. Lilly's nostrils flared at the acrid scent of nightshade and something metallic like blood left too long on copper. "Stay back," she commanded Madame Beaumont, who had scrambled into the corner, pins scattered from her mouth like tiny silver fish. The vapor thickened, congealing into a shimmering portal that stretched from floor to ceiling. 3 figures stepped through, their forms solidifying as they crossed the threshold. Men in charcoal robes, their faces obscured by hoods that seemed to swallow light rather than merely block it. Each carried a weapon that defied natural law, flails whose chains flowed like liquid silver, droplets of mercury suspended in their wake. "The Count sends his regards, Ravenwood," the tallest one announced, his voice a rasp that scraped against the ear like rusted nails. Lilly's tattoos burned beneath the half-finished gown, responding to the proximity of hostile magic. "How inconsiderate," she snarled, shifting her weight to the balls of her feet. "I'm not dressed for company." The first warlock lunged, his mercury flail singing a banshee wail as it cut through the air. Lilly twisted sideways, the movement sending pins digging into her flesh like tiny daggers. The flail missed her by inches, striking her vanity instead. The mirror shattered, raining glass across the carpet as perfume bottles exploded in a cloud of competing scents. Madame Beaumont's scream provided a momentary distraction, just enough for Lilly to snatch the silver letter opener from her writing desk. The second warlock advanced, his flail whipping toward her throat. She parried with the letter opener, the impact sending vibrations up her arm. Not optimal. Mercury splashed across the emerald silk of her gown, eating through the fabric like acid. "Filthy witch!" the warlock spat, readying another strike. Lilly's fingers found a corset stay that had fallen to the floor, its boning rigid and sharp at one end where it had snapped. The third warlock circled behind her, his flail cutting through silk drapes that billowed and collapsed like banished ghosts. The room transformed into a whirlwind of destruction. Porcelain figurines smashing against walls, books tumbling from shelves, feathers erupting from slashed pillows to dance in the air like macabre snow. Each broken item, each tear in the fabric of her sanctuary, stoked the cold fury building in Lilly's chest. She ducked beneath another swing, the mercury flail passing close enough to sever a lock of her hair. The strands fell to the carpet, blackening on contact with the spilled mercury. Lilly drove her knee upward into the first warlock's sternum, feeling the satisfying crunch of cartilage giving way. He stumbled backward, gasping. The second warlock's flail caught her across the shoulder, tearing through silk and skin alike. Pain bloomed, hot and immediate, but Lilly channeled it, letting it sharpen her focus rather than dull it. She spun, driving the letter opener into the soft flesh beneath his jaw. Blood spurted, warm and sticky against her hand. "Silence becomes you," she whispered as he gurgled and collapsed. The third warlock hesitated, his hood slipping to reveal a face mottled with ritual scars. Lilly advanced, the corset now gripped in both hands. He swung wildly, his flail destroying what remained of her dressing table. Lilly sidestepped, looped the corset stay around his throat from behind, and pulled with all her strength. The boning bit into his flesh, cutting off his air. He clawed at it, his flail dropping to the floor where it splashed like quicksilver, forming fractal patterns on the ruined carpet. Lilly maintained her grip, feeling his struggles weaken as his lungs screamed for air. The first warlock had regained his feet, clutching his chest where her knee had connected. His eyes widened at the sight of his companions, one bleeding out on the floor, the other turning blue in Lilly's improvised garrote. The warlock's flail whistled through the air, a silver blur that Lilly couldn't entirely evade. Mercury splashed across her exposed shoulder, burning like molten lead against her skin. She bit back a scream as the enchanted liquid ate into her shoulder, leaving a constellation of angry red welts in its wake. "You'll pay for that!" she snarled, pivoting on her heel to face her attacker. The remaining warlock circled her like a wolf eyeing her for an opening, his hood casting his face in shadow. Twirled his flail with practiced precision, droplets of mercury catching the morning light that streamed through the shattered window. "The Count grows impatient, witch," he said, his voice like gravel underfoot. "Your defiance only prolongs your suffering." Lilly's gaze darted around the room, cataloguing potential weapons amid the destruction. Her fingers closed around a jagged shard of mirror glass, its edge gleaming with deadly promise. The warlock lunged and she twisted sideways, bringing the glass up in a defensive arc. The flail's chain wrapped around her forearm, its mercury head splattering across the room. Pain exploded through her arm as the enchanted metal seared her skin. Simultaneously, the mirror shard sliced deep across her palm, blood welling immediately from the wound. But something strange happened. The droplets of blood didn't fall. They hovered, suspended in the air between her and the warlock, crystallizing before her eyes into tiny, perfect stars. Each no larger than a grain of rice, yet glittering with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat and intensified in power. The shorter warlock stumbled backward as he struggled free from Lilly's improvised garrote, his hood falling away to reveal a face etched with ritual scars. "The star blood awakens!" he gasped, eyes widening with recognition and unmistakable fear. Lilly stared at the floating constellation of blood stars, momentarily transfixed by their impossible geometry. They rotated slowly, as if awaiting instruction, their edges sharp as diamonds. The taller warlock recovered first, swinging his flail toward her head. Without conscious thought, Lilly thrust her bleeding palm toward him. The blood stars responded, shooting forward with the velocity of bullets from a flintlock pistol. They pierced the warlock's robes, embedding themselves in his chest and throat, hitting vital spots with surgical precision. He made a wet, gurgling sound as he collapsed, blood bubbling between his lips. The stars had tunneled through flesh and bone alike, leaving perfect star-shaped wounds in their wake. "We'll need more than soap for that stain," Lilly said, her voice steady, despite the shock rippling through her. The scent of her blood mingled with the sharp tang of ozone that now filled the room. The air crackled with unfamiliar energy. Not the raw, chaotic power of the storm she had once channeled before, but something more refined, more focused. The remaining warlock backed toward the ruined window, his flail held defensively before him. Lilly looked down at her bleeding palm, where more blood was already crystallizing into stars. Unlike the storm's power, which had threatened to consume her from within, this felt controlled, an extension of her will, rather than a force to be survived. The warlock's fear told her this was significant. This star blood meant something special. Another piece of the puzzle Revenko had kept from her. Another secret of her lineage revealed through violence. She closed her fingers into a fist, feeling the stars dissolve back into liquid, warm against her skin. The pain of her wounds receded beneath a surge of newfound power, a clarity of purpose that straightened her spine and steadied her breath. "Tell me," she said to the remaining warlock, opening her palm to reveal fresh stars forming above the wound. "What exactly is star blood?" The warlock's retreat was a dance of fear and calculation, each step measured against the growing threat before him. His flail hung at his side, mercury droplets beading along its chain like poisonous dew. The morning light filtering through the shattered window caught in those silver globules. "The Count will have what he seeks," he said, voice steadier than his eyes. "Whether from your corpse or your living flesh matters little." Lilly's gaze tracked his movement, her body coiled with predatory awareness. Blood from her palm wound continued to crystallize, forming tiny stars that hovered at her fingertips, awaiting direction. The pain of her mercury burns had receded to a dull throb, overshadowed by the strange new power humming through her veins. "Your companions might disagree," she said, nodding toward the fallen warlock whose chest bore perfect star-shaped tunnels. If they could still speak. The warlock's lips thinned beneath his ritual scars. He shifted his weight, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. His eyes darted between the door and the ruined window, calculating escape routes, then back to her bleeding palm, where more stars materialized. "The Count said you might manifest," he muttered quietly, more to himself than to her. "But not like this. Not so soon." Lilly took a step forward, and he responded with a sudden, desperate swing of his flail. The mercury head whistled through the air, missing her face by inches as she twisted away. The momentum carried the weapon past her, its chain wrapping around a wooden chair leg. The warlock yanked it free, sending the chair skidding across the floor. It collided with the dressing table. Mercury droplets spattered across the carpet and her silk shawl, sizzling as they burned through the threads. The scent hit her from the room's destruction. Rosemary and wood smoke. A phantom memory of her mother's hands working the needle by firelight, humming that same lullaby that had haunted Lilly's dreams for decades. Her silk shawl, one of the very few things left from her past. Its faded blues and greens, once vibrant as spring meadows, now marred by spreading black circles where the mercury ate through the fibers. Something snapped inside Lilly, not with the hot rush of ordinary anger, but with the cold, absolute certainty of glacial ice cracking. Her vision sharpened to painful clarity. The room's edges grew crisp, colors intensified, and time itself seemed to slow down. Her tattoos flared to life, no longer the subtle glow of embers, but the blinding white incandescence of stars going supernova. Light poured from the arcane patterns etched into her skin, and spread to the hovering blood stars, casting harsh shadows across the room's destruction. The warlock raised his arm to shield his eyes. What manner of... His words died as the air around Lilly shimmered, hundreds of new blood stars materializing in a swirling galaxy around her body. They hung suspended, each a perfect, shining point mirroring the light from her tattoos, multiplying it into a constellation of deadly intent. The pain from her wounds vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, limitless power that flowed through her like liquid nitrogen, annihilation distilled to its purest form. The warlock's flail trembled in his hand. Mercury dripped from its head onto the floor, forming perfect silver spheres that rolled away from Lilly as if repelled by her presence. His eyes widened as he took in the deadly constellation surrounding her, understanding blooming too late. "The Count never told you truly what you were hunting, did he?" Lilly said, her voice eerily calm despite the rage coursing through her. Her gaze fixed on the ruined shawl, its destruction the final insult after years of loss and manipulation. The stars moved with a will of their own, yet answered to hers. 1,000 points of transmuted blood, each no larger than a grain of sand, each deadly as a bullet. They hung suspended in the air between Lilly and the warlock, a constellation awaiting her command. "The Count never told you what you were hunting," Lilly repeated, her voice a winter river flowing beneath ice. "Because he doesn't know what I've become." The warlock's eyes widened, pupils dilating with the sudden terrible understanding that comes too late. His lips formed words that never found voice as Lilly extended her hand, palm forward. The stars surged. They moved not as a single mass, but as a coordinated swarm, each tiny projectile finding its own path through the air. The sound they made was like sleet against a windowpane, a crystalline whisper of death. They struck the warlock's body in waves, penetrating flesh with surgical precision, each one boring a perfect star-shaped tunnel through skin, muscle, and organ. His scream began as a howl of agony, but ended in a wet gurgle as stars punched through his throat, his lungs, his heart. Blood fountained from 1,000 tiny perforations, each wound too small to be fatal alone, yet overwhelming in their multitude of thousands. The mercury flail slipped from nerveless fingers, its chain rattling against the floorboards like the last breaths of a dying snake. The warlock collapsed to his knees, then pitched forward onto the floor. His blood spread across the polished wood in a growing pool, reflecting the morning light that streamed through the shattered window. The stars that had passed through his body embedded themselves in the far wall, creating a macabre constellation against the floral wallpaper. Silence fell across the room, broken only by Madame Beaumont's ragged breathing from where she cowered behind an overturned dressing table. "Mon Dieu," the dressmaker whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mon Dieu, mon Dieu." Lilly surveyed the carnage with clinical detachment. 3 warlocks lay dead in her boudoir. The first with his chest cavity hollowed out by her initial uncontrolled burst of power. The second slumped against the wall, his throat opened by the silver letter opener. And now the third, riddled with star-shaped wounds too numerous to count. Her gown hung in tatters around her, the silk torn and stained with both her blood and theirs. Mercury burns marked her skin where the flail had grazed her, but even these were already fading, healing at an impossible rate. Small cuts from flying glass decorated her arms and face, but these too seemed trivial, distant, as though they belonged to someone else's body. The power that had surged through her was receding now, like a tide pulling back from shore, leaving her standing in its wake. Her tattoos still glowed, but the blinding intensity had dimmed to a steady pulse that matched her heartbeat. The remaining blood stars hovered near her fingertips, awaiting direction, their light gradually fading as the magic that sustained them ebbed. What struck Lilly most profoundly was not the destruction she had wrought, but the control she had maintained. This was not the chaotic explosion of power she had experienced on the rooftop during the storm. This was precision, intent, mastery. She flexed her fingers, watching as the last of the stars winked out of existence, their substance returning to ordinary blood that dripped from her palm onto the floor. The wound there was already closing, knitting itself together before her eyes. Lilly turned toward the dressmaker, who flinched at the movement. A glint of black caught Lilly's eye amid the carnage obsidian, smooth as night, nestled against the dead warlock's outstretched fingers. The scrying stone had rolled from his pocket during his death throes, its polished surface unmarred by the blood pooling around it. Lilly moved toward it with predatory grace, her bare feet avoiding shards of glass and splinters of wood with unconscious precision. The stone called to her, its presence an intrusion more intimate than the warlocks themselves had been. "Revenko's eyes," she murmured, crouching to examine it without touching its surface. The obsidian rippled like disturbed water, darkness swirling within its depths. Images formed. London streets were veiled in morning fog, gas lamps creating halos of sickly yellow light. Through this urban mist moved figures with purpose, their movements fluid and coordinated. Not human. Wolves in human form, their shoulders hunched with barely contained power. Gabriel led them, his silver-streaked hair unmistakable even through the stone's murky vision. His face, weathered as ancient oak, bore the same expression of grim determination she remembered from the last time she met him. Behind him stalked younger wolves, hungry and alert, moving through the fog like shadows given flesh. The vision shifted, showing their destination, her flat in Belgravia. The wolves were coming for her. Lilly's tattoos pulsed once, a warning or acknowledgement, she couldn't tell which. Allies or opportunists? She whispered to herself, watching Gabriel's face in the stone. His eyes, even through the scrying medium, held knowledge. Of her. Of William. Of things she had yet to uncover. The timing couldn't be worse. Her boudoir lay in ruins, 3 dead warlocks cooling on the floor, and her own newly awakened power still humming through her veins, like electricity seeking ground. She couldn't afford another confrontation here, not with the evidence of her abilities so plainly displayed. With deliberate slowness, Lilly reached up and removed a silver hairpin from her disheveled coiffure. A lock of raven black hair fell across her face, but she made no move to brush it away. Her focus remained on the stone, on the wolves drawing ever closer to her sanctuary. "No more watching," she said, her voice winter cold. "No more puppetry." The hairpin descended, its tips striking the center of the obsidian with surgical precision. The stone's surface resisted for a heartbeat, then yielded with a sound like distant ice breaking on a frozen river. Cracks spiderwebbed outward from the impact point, each one severing another thread of Revenko's surveillance. The vision within the stone fragmented. Gabriel's face splitting into jagged pieces, the wolves dissolving into shadow and fog. With a final, decisive crack, the scrying stone shattered completely, its fragments scattering across the blood-stained floorboards. Madame Beaumont whimpered from her hiding place, drawing Lilly's attention. The dressmaker's face was ashen, her eyes wide with terror and incomprehension. She clutched a torn piece of silk to her chest like a shield, though both women knew how useless such protection would be. Lilly rose to her feet, brushing obsidian dust from her fingertips. The blood stars had faded, but their power remained within her, waiting to be called forth again. She surveyed the destruction of her boudoir, the shattered window, the overturned furniture, the cooling bodies of the warlocks, and came to a swift decision. "Madame Beaumont," she said, her voice carrying the same casual tone one might use to discuss the weather. "I believe we'll need to reschedule our fitting." The dressmaker's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. "Mademoiselle Ravenwood, these men, what you did to them." Lilly moved to her wardrobe, selecting a practical ensemble with swift, economical movements. "They came to kill me, madame. I merely returned the favor with interest." Her fingers traced the star-shaped wounds on the nearest warlock's body, a constellation of death etched into cooling flesh. The wolves would be here soon, and she needed to be gone before they arrived. Questions about Gabriel and his pack would have to wait. The morning light strengthened, illuminating the destruction in harsh detail. Lilly dressed quickly, finding unharmed clothes in her remarkably undamaged closet, her mind already calculating routes through the city, safe houses, and contingencies. The wolves were coming, and with them, perhaps, answers about William. But first, she needed distance and time. Time to understand what she had become. The fog at Ratcliffe Crossdocks hung like a shroud, thick enough to swallow sound and dense enough to blur the boundaries between this world and others. Lilly crouched atop a stack of shipping crates, her body a perfect stillness against the night. The tip she got from her usual urchin information gatherer was good. The vampires moved with unnatural grace, their pale skin luminescent in the weak moonlight that occasionally pierced the fog. Their movements carried the fluid precision of predators, economical and purposeful. Each one bore the telltale signs of their condition. Skin like hard marble, eyes that reflected light like a cat's, teeth that seemed too sharp even when their mouths remained closed. Iron cages lined the dock, stacked 3 high in places. Within them, children huddled against cold metal bars, their thin frames trembling with cold and terror. Some wept silently, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on their faces. Others stared with hollow eyes, hope already drained from their small bodies. The lead vampire paced the length of the dock, his silk cravat stained with what Lilly recognized as feeding marks, droplets of blood that had escaped his careful consumption. His boots clicked against the wooden planks, the sound carrying through the mist like skeletal fingers tapping on glass. "Hurry, you fools," he snapped, voice carrying the cultured tones of aristocracy beneath its impatience. "The tide waits for no one, and neither does the Count." The air carried a nauseating mixture of scents, the burnt sugar and copper tang of vampire ash from some recent altercation, the acrid bite of creosote from the dock timbers, the salt of the Thames, and beneath it all, the sour smell of children's fear. Lilly's nostrils flared as she took it in, cataloguing each element with cold precision. A small whimper rose from one of the cages as a vampire handler rapped his knuckles against the bars. "Silence," he hissed, fangs gleaming. The child, a girl no more than 7, bit her lip until it bled, eyes wide with terror. Cold fury crystallized in Lilly's chest. This was the line. This was where Revenko's depravity became unforgivable, even by her flexible standards. The bloodstars she had discovered in her boudoir stirred beneath her skin, eager for release, for vengeance. Westwood had been right. The manifest hadn't lied, and here was yet another shipment. Children bound for God knew what purpose, their innocence and potential to be consumed by Revenko's ambitions. The tattoos on her skin sent her a shiver once, as if recognizing kindred spirits in these caged young ones. All of them severed from protection, from families, from safety. The fog swirled as a barge approached the dock, its outline ghostly in the mist. The lead vampire checked a pocket watch, its gold case catching what little light penetrated the gloom. "Begin loading," he commanded, gesturing toward the barge. "The Count expects delivery before dawn." Vampires moved to the cages, unlocking them and hauling children out by their arms. Some fought weakly, earning cuffs to the head that left them dazed. Others went limp, surrendering to whatever fate awaited them. Lilly's fingers found the hilt of her atheme, its weight a comfort against her palm. The blood in her veins sang with anticipation, with rage, with purpose. The stars that had burst from her wounds in her boudoir waited just beneath the surface of her skin, ready to be called forth again. The lead vampire tilted his head suddenly, nostrils flaring. He scanned the darkness, eyes narrowing as they swept across the stacked crates where Lilly crouched. For a moment, she thought he had caught her scent, but his gaze moved on, returning to the loading operation. A small boy stumbled as he was pushed toward the barge, falling to his knees on the rough planks. The vampire handler yanked him upright by his hair, eliciting a cry of pain that cut through the fog like a knife. Something inside Lilly shifted, a decision made without conscious thought. The blood stars pulsed beneath her skin, eager for release. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Power is neither good nor evil, child. It simply is. The hand that wields it makes that choice. Tonight, her power would not serve Revenko's purposes. Tonight, it would serve her. With practiced precision, she drew the blade of her atheme across her forearm, opening a thin line of crimson. The blood welled, dark as midnight against her skin, then began to change. It lifted from the wound, suspended in the air like droplets of oil in water, before transforming into tiny, crystalline, perfect stars that glittered with cold starlight. The stars orbited her wrist, multiplying as they spun. Each one no larger than a grain of sand, yet burning with the intensity of distant suns. They hummed a melody only Lilly could hear, the sound reminiscent of her mother's lullaby. "Time to dance," she whispered to them, her voice barely audible above the lapping of the Thames against the dock pilings. The fog parted around her as she rose from her crouch, the mist seeming to recoil from the heat of her blood-borne constellations. Lilly gauged the distance to the lead vampire, calculated the trajectory, then launched herself from the stack of crates. Her body arced through the air, a perfect somersault that carried her over the heads of the undead handlers and their cargo of frightened children. She landed in absolute silence behind the aristocratic vampire, her boots touching the weathered planks with no more sound than a moth's wings. The vampire continued his inspection of the manifest, unaware of death standing at his shoulder. "The Count will be pleased," he murmured to his subordinate. "These specimens are particularly—" "Fetch, little darlings," Lilly commanded, splaying her fingers toward the cages. The blood stars shot forward like a swarm of furious fireflies, splitting into 3 streams. One stream raced toward the iron locks on the children's cages, burning through metal with a hiss and the scent of scorched iron. The second and third streams spiraled around the vampires, penetrating cloth, flesh, and bone with surgical precision. The lead vampire spun, his face contorting from aristocratic boredom to shock as tiny points of light burrowed into his shoulder. His pale skin began to smoke, the flesh around each star blackening and crumbling to ash. "Ravenwood!" he snarled, fangs extending in pain and rage. "The Count warned us about you." Lilly tilted her head, a predatory smile playing across her lips. "Did he mention this part?" she asked, as another constellation of stars pierced his other shoulder, burning through his expensive coat and the dead flesh beneath. The vampire howled, a sound that carried across the water like a banshee's wail. Around him, his companions clawed at their own bodies, trying to extract the burning stars that consumed them from within. Their skin smoldered, tiny pinpricks of light visible through their clothing as the stars tunneled deeper. Children scrambled from their opened cages, some weeping in relief, others too stunned to make a sound. A small girl with matted blonde hair stared at Lilly with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Run, little one," Lilly told her, never taking her gaze from the lead vampire. "All of you, into the shadows. Now." The children needed no second urging. They scattered like startled birds, disappearing into the maze of crates and barrels that lined the docks. The lead vampire lunged at Lilly, his movements blurred with preternatural speed. But Lilly had anticipated this. She pivoted, her body flowing like water around his attack. More stars erupted from the cut on her arm, swarming around her like a protective shield. "The Count collects children now?" Lilly asked, her voice cold as winter frost. "Even for Revenko, that's low." The vampire's laugh was brittle, his handsome face contorted with pain and fury. "You understand nothing, Ravenwood. The children are vessels, nothing more. Their innocence makes them perfect conduits for what comes next." Lilly felt her rage crystallize into something harder, sharper. These children, torn from their homes, their mothers. It struck a chord deep within her, where the memory of her own mother's protection still lived. "What comes next," she said, "is your end." The stars around her flared brighter, their light reflecting in the vampire's terrified eyes. They spun faster, drawing closer to Lilly's body, until she appeared to be clothed in a constellation of her own making. The dock timbers beneath her feet began to smoke where stray stars touched them. The vampire lord's voice cracked like brittle parchment as he pointed a trembling finger toward Lilly. "Kill her!" His command hung in the night air for precisely 3 heartbeats before the fog at the edge of the dock began to curl and part, as if sliced by invisible blades. The mist peeled back to reveal a line of massive shapes, low to the ground and moving with predatory purpose. Amber eyes pierced the darkness, glowing like hot coals nestled in the fog. The lead wolf's shoulders stood as high as a man's shoulder, its silvered fur catching what little moonlight penetrated the Thames' perpetual haze. Behind it came others, black as pitch, russet as autumn leaves, grey as tombstones, all moving in perfect, terrible synchronicity of a well-honed pack. The lead vampire's face contorted, fear replacing rage as he recognized the new threat. "Werewolves!" he hissed, backing toward the barge. "Form ranks!" His remaining underlings moved to obey, but their movements seemed sluggish compared to the fluid grace of the wolves. The pack split into 3 groups, without so much as a sound passing between them, flanking the vampires with military precision. Lilly stepped back, her blood stars still orbiting her body like tiny sentinels. She watched as the largest wolf, Gabriel, she presumed, launched himself at the nearest vampire. His jaws closed around the creature's throat with a wet crunch that echoed across the water. The vampire's flesh blackened from the point of contact outward, crumbling to ash and empty clothing even as he struggled. "Fascinating," Lilly murmured, observing the efficiency of tooth and claw against undead flesh. A russet wolf with a white-tipped tail darted between 2 vampires, hamstringing one with a precise bite before rolling away from the other's grasp. The wounded vampire collapsed, his companion lunging for the wolf only to meet another of the pack mid-air. They collided with the sound of a butcher's cleaver striking bone. The dock transformed into a battlefield of snarls and screams. Vampires turned to ash with distinctive crackles, the sound reminiscent of kindling catching flame. The wolves moved as one organism, communicating through subtle shifts of ear and tail, covering each other's flanks with practiced ease. A female vampire with hair like spun silver made a desperate lunge toward the children's cages. Lilly flicked her wrist, sending 3 blood stars racing through the air. They pierced the vampire's spine in a perfect line, each one burning through dead flesh like hot iron through snow. The vampire's scream cut short as her body disintegrated. The children huddled together, wide-eyed but silent, watching their captors fall. A small boy with a bruised face stared at Lilly, then at the wolves, his expression shifting from terror to cautious hope. A black wolf with a grey muzzle. Connor, if Lilly remembered correctly from Westwood's intelligence, tore the arm from a vampire who'd drawn a silver-bladed dagger. The limb turned to dust before it hit the planks. Connor spat out the remnants, a sound like disgust rumbling from his chest. Lilly circled toward the children's cages, keeping her back to the water. The wolves were thorough, methodical in their destruction. Not a single vampire would escape this night. It was impressive, she had to admit. Their savagery held an artistry she could appreciate, even if she trusted them no more than she trusted the leeches they were dismembering. The lead vampire made a final stand near the gangplank, his fine clothes now tattered and stained with his own blackened blood. Gabriel approached him slowly, hackles raised, teeth bared in what almost resembled a smile. "The Count will have your pelts for this," the vampire snarled, his aristocratic facade crumbling as Gabriel closed in. "He'll hang them in his study and drink wine while—" Gabriel's attack silenced him mid-threat. The alpha wolf's jaws closed around the vampire's chest, directly over where a human heart would beat. The vampire's body convulsed once, then collapsed into a shower of ash that scattered across the dock planks. Silence fell, broken only by the lapping of the Thames against the pilings and the soft whimpers of the children. The wolves stood, calming down from battle, their breath forming small clouds in the night air, amber eyes now turning towards Lilly. She felt a grim satisfaction as she surveyed the scene. The wolves had been efficient, brutal in their execution. A temporary alignment of interests, nothing more, but useful nonetheless. She kept her blood stars spinning, a silent warning that she was not defenseless. Gabriel approached, his massive form transforming with each step. Bones cracked and shifted beneath his skin, fur receding, until a man stood where the wolf had been. Naked, save for a leather cord around his neck, bearing a crimson paw print charm. His body was a map of old scars and fresh wounds. "Ravenwood," he said, his voice a gravelled rumble that matched his wolf's growl. "It seems we share an interest in the Count's business tonight." Lilly's stars continued their orbit around her, tiny points of deadly light reflecting in Gabriel's amber eyes. "So it seems," she replied, her gaze flicking to the other wolves as they maintained their positions, muscles tensed and ready. "Though I doubt our reasons align beyond this dock." A last vampire dragged himself across the dock planks, leaving a trail of blackened ichor that sizzled against the weathered wood. His fine clothes, once the envy of London's undead elite, hung in tatters from his skeletal frame. One leg had been completely severed by Connor's attack, the stump already crumbling to ash that scattered in the night breeze. Lilly approached with unhurried steps, her blood stars orbiting her like tiny crimson suns. The children watched from their scattered hiding places among crates, their eyes reflecting the supernatural light of her magic. Some huddled together, trembling, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. "The Count will flay you alive for this, Ravenwood," the vampire hissed, his aristocratic accent slipping as panic took hold. His fangs gleamed in the moonlight, desperate and defensive. Lily's lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. "The Count should have remembered what happens to those who try to collar me." She knelt beside him, her movements fluid and precise. The athame slid from her scabbard into her palm, its blade catching the light of her constellation. The vampire's eyes widened, recognition dawning as she pressed the tip against his chest. "Wait," he gasped, but Lilly was already carving. The blade sank into dead flesh with surprising resistance, like cutting through cold clay. The vampire's body convulsed, his mouth opening in a silent scream as Lilly worked. Her hand moved with the practiced precision of an artist, each stroke deliberate and meaningful. The silver damask of the blade burned wherever it touched, leaving smoking furrows in its wake. A pattern emerged beneath her blade. Not Revenko's raven, but something older, more primal. A 5-pointed star enclosed in a circle, with intricate runes flowing between the points. The Blackwood sigil, her true inheritance. The vampire's eyes fixed on the emerging symbol, terror replacing pain. "That's impossible. That sigil was lost." "Lost and forgotten?" Lilly whispered, completing the final stroke. "Not everything was lost." She sat back on her heels, admiring her handiwork. The sigil pulsed with a life of its own, the carved lines deepening, widening, as if hungry for more. The vampire stared at his chest in horror, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. "You don't know what you've awakened," he whispered. Lilly tilted her head, the blood stars spinning faster around her wrist. "I know exactly what I've awakened." With a flick of her fingers, the stars detached from their orbit and hovered above the carved sigil. They trembled in the air, vibrating with barely contained power. The vampire's body began to shake, his remaining limbs spasming against the dock. "Please," he began. Lilly closed her fist. The stars plunged into the sigil. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the vampire's chest cavity erupted with light, not the gentle glow of her stars, but something brighter, harsher, a supernova contained in dead flesh. The light poured from his eyes, his mouth, from every pore of his skin. A sound beyond sound filled the air, a vibration that rattled teeth and bones. The children clapped hands over their ears, but Lilly remained still, watching as the vampire's body expanded, stretched, and then shattered into thousands of crimson ice shards that hung suspended in the air for one impossible moment. The shards dissolved into ash, a fine grey powder that scattered across the dock, swirling in patterns that mimicked the sigil before dispersing into the Thames. Lilly rose to her feet, power thrumming through her veins. The sensation was intoxicating, almost overwhelming, but she held it in check, a leashed storm responding to her will alone. This was more than a kill. It was a declaration, a reclaiming of what Revenko had tried to suppress. She turned toward the children. The smallest child, a boy with hollow cheeks and wary eyes, stared at her without blinking. "Are you a witch?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the lapping of the Thames. Lily's expression softened for the briefest moment. "Something like that," she replied. The silence that followed the vampire's disintegration was absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of the Thames against the dock pilings. Ash drifted across the wooden planks like dirty snow, swirling in eddies that caught the moonlight before settling into the cracks between boards. The air hung heavy with the acrid smell of ozone and burnt flesh, a metallic tang that coated the tongue and stung the nostrils. Lily's blood stars dimmed, their crimson light fading as they spiraled back toward her wrist, sinking beneath her skin with a sensation like warm honey flowing through her veins. The power that had surged through her moments before receded to a low hum, a reminder rather than a roar. The children watched her, eyes wide and reflecting the fading supernatural glow. Some pressed against each other, their small fingers curled around sleeves, while others huddled together by the crates, trembling like autumn leaves in a gale. Their faces bore the hollow-cheeked look of the half-starved, but in their eyes, Lily saw something beyond fear. A cautious, fragile hope. "It's all right," she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. "They're gone now." A massive shadow detached itself from the darkness between two stacks of crates. Connor, Gabriel's enforcer, padded forward on silent paws, his grey fur silvered by moonlight. His amber eyes, intelligent and assessing, met Lily's for a long moment. Something passed between them, not trust, precisely, but recognition. A nod to her competence, perhaps, or acknowledgement of their temporary alliance. Connor's gaze swept over the freed children, his massive head dipping once in what might have been approval. Then, with the fluid grace that belied his size, he melted back into the shadows, leaving only the memory of those burning amber eyes. The scrape of a boot against wood drew Lily's attention to a stack of barrels. A dock worker cowered there, his face pale as a fish belly in the moonlight. He'd witnessed everything. The vampires, the bloodstars, the werewolves. His hands shook as he clutched a loading hook, the tool forgotten as a weapon. "Bloody hell," he whispered, his voice carrying in the night stillness. "It's Ravenwood's reckoning." The words hung in the air between them, new and yet somehow familiar. Lily tilted her head, considering. Ravenwood's reckoning. The name had a pleasing symmetry to it, a weight that settled comfortably in the mind. She wiped her athame dagger clean on a scrap of cloth, the silver damask blade catching the light as she slid it back into its sheath. Let the name spread, she thought. Let it carry on the whispers of dock workers and street urchins through the alleys and rookeries of London. Let it reach Revenko's ears. The dock worker backed away, his eyes never leaving her face. Fear and awe warred in his expression, as if he'd witnessed something from the penny dreadfuls come to life before him. Lily turned back to the children, a weary satisfaction settling in her bones. They were safe for now. The Count's plans had been disrupted, the vampires reduced to ash and memory. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps. One of the smaller children, a girl with tangled blonde hair and eyes too old for her face, reached out a hesitant hand. Lily paused, then allowed the child's fingers to brush against her own. The touch was light as a butterfly's wing, there and gone. "Thank you," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible above the river's constant murmur. Behind them, the dock workers' footsteps receded at a run, carrying tales of bloodstars and ash, of werewolves and a woman with tattoos that glowed like fire, carrying the name Ravenwood's Reckoning. Mercury pooled across the marble floor like liquid moonlight, reflecting the crimson glow of fires that raged beyond the shattered windows. The grand foyer of Revenko's Blackfriars stronghold lay in magnificent ruin, its opulence reduced to splinters and twisted metal. Clockwork sentries sprawled in broken heaps, their glass eyes staring sightlessly at the vaulted ceiling, gears and springs scattered like the entrails of mechanical beasts. Lilly stepped through the splintered remains of the massive oak doors, her boots leaving crimson footprints that hissed and steamed where they touched the mercury-slicked stone. The blood and ichor of Revenko's guardians clung to her boots like mud, the metallic scent mingling with the acrid tang of alchemy and destruction. A waterfall of quicksilver cascaded from ruptured pipes along the eastern wall, catching firelight in hypnotic patterns before joining the reflective pool below. The liquid metal parted around the remains of an ornate writing desk, its drawers torn free and emptied, papers strewn like fallen leaves across the destruction. "The wolves have been busy before they joined me at the docks," she murmured, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. Her athame rested comfortably in her palm, its edge gleaming with an eager hunger that matched her own. The blood stars beneath her skin pulsed in time with her heartbeat, ready to emerge at her command. She flexed her fingers, feeling the power coiled within her veins like a serpent preparing to strike. The silence pressed against her eardrums, broken only by the occasional creak of settling debris and the distant howl of a wolf. A sound that might have been mistaken for the wind by those unfamiliar with the Crimson Paw's victory cry. The pack had done their part, clearing the way for what must come next. Lilly moved deeper into the foyer, stepping over the twisted remains of a clockwork sentry. Its chest cavity gaped open, revealing the empty space where a human heart had once been imprisoned to power its mechanisms. She nudged the construct with her toe, watching as it slid a few inches across the mercury, leaving a trail like a slug's path. The air hung heavy with the scent of ozone and burnt flesh, the unmistakable signature of magic unleashed in violence. Revenko's power still lingered in the walls, in the very stones beneath her feet. A suffocating presence that had once inspired fear. Now, it only fueled her determination. Her tattoos glowed faintly beneath her skin, responding to the residual magic that saturated the stronghold. She had come to sever that connection once and for all. Lilly paused at the foot of the grand staircase, its marble steps cracked and stained with substances she chose not to examine too closely. Her gaze swept the destruction, taking in the grotesque tableau of Revenko's broken domain. Shattered glass crunched beneath her boots as she moved to the center of the foyer. She tilted her head back, her voice rising to fill every corner of the ruined stronghold. "Revenko!" The name tore from her throat like a challenge. "I've come to return your hospitality." The words hung in the air, a declaration of intent that set her blood stars pulsing brighter beneath her skin. She waited, dagger ready, for the man who had shaped her into a weapon to face the edge he had honed.